It is February of 1947. The ice shelf has no name on any chart that matters. And the fleet that steamed into this place, the largest military polar expedition in the history of human exploration, is packing up and leaving. They arrived with enough supplies for 8 months. They are leaving after 8 weeks. Nobody has explained why, not publicly, not in any document you can access without a FOIA request and several years of patience. The men who climbed back aboard those ships did not speak freely about what happened on the ice, not to journalists, not in their memoirs, not in the oral history projects that came after. They carried something home that they chose, for reasons that were apparently their own, not to put into words. The fleet's public-facing commander, one of the most celebrated explorers in American history, gave one interview on the way home. He told a Chilean newspaper that the United States must prepare, immediately, for an attack from the poles, an attack unlike any the country had seen before. Then he said nothing else about it, for the rest of his life. So here is the question I want you to sit with. What did 4,700 men, combat veterans, trained observers, men who had survived the Pacific and the Atlantic, what did they see in Antarctica that made the United States Navy turn around and run? Before we go any deeper into this, I want to know where you are watching from right now. Drop your city, your country, in the comments below. I read every single one. Today's like goal is just 50. That is it, 50. If we cross that, that is your support, your signal, and honestly, that is what keeps me making content like this for you. If you are new here and you like mysteries that actually happened, hit subscribe. We go deep on this channel. Now, let's go back to where this all began. The war ended in August of 1945. 12 months later, the United States military is still in the middle of the largest demobilization in human history. 12 million men in uniform at peak, bases closing, equipment being sold for scrap, a federal budget stretched across a continental reconstruction effort. This is the context that makes what happens next so difficult to explain away. Because in August of 1946, in the middle of all that exhaustion and economic pressure, the United States Navy assembled the largest polar expedition ever attempted. 13 ships. The USS Philippine Sea, an Essex-class fleet aircraft carrier. The USS Senate, a Balao-class combat submarine commissioned in 1944, Pacific War veteran, 23 aircraft. Icebreakers, supply vessels, 4,700 personnel. They named it Operation Highjump. Official designation, the Antarctic Developments Project, Task Force 68. It remains, to this day, the largest military polar deployment in history. But here is what the Navy knew before a single ship left port. In 1938, 1 year before World War II began, Nazi Germany had already sent an expedition to Antarctica. The vessel was the Schwabenland. German pilots flew low across a section of the continent, photographing terrain and dropping swastika-marked metal flags into the ice to physically claim the territory. They named it Neuschwabenland. New Swabia. This is documented history. Bundeschief, German federal record, not disputed. And by 1946, American military intelligence was tracking serious, unverified reports that senior Nazi officers and technical personnel had used the final months of the war to establish a covert base somewhere in the Antarctic interior. The intelligence community had not been able to confirm it. They also had not been able to rule it out. The Navy assembled a combat-ready armada and sent it south. But the enemy they were looking for was not the only thing they found. His name was David Bunger, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy. Decorated pilot with thousands of hours of polar flying behind him. He had been assigned to Task Force 68 as a survey aviator. His job was to fly grid patterns over the Antarctic coastline, photographing terrain that no human eye had mapped. He had been doing it for weeks. Ice, more ice. The same gray-white featureless expanse in every direction, mile after mile, hour after hour. On a survey flight in January of 1947, over the eastern sector of the continent, Bunger sees something that his training cannot immediately process. A dark patch on the horizon. He knows what polar mirages look like. He has seen dozens of them. Phantom coastlines, false mountains, lakes that dissolve as you approach. The Antarctic atmosphere plays optical tricks on even the most experienced eyes. He assumes this is another one. He keeps flying toward it. It does not dissolve. In his own words, preserved in post-expedition debriefing transcripts, Bunger later described the moment. He said, "When he first saw the land, it was a dark patch, that might have been a distant mountain, and he thought it must be a mirage. There are many optical illusions in the polar regions. Within half an hour of flying, he knew it was real. But incredible, but real. What Bunger had located, and what now appears on every official Antarctic map under the name the Bunger Oasis, was a massive expanse of snow-free land, miles wide, containing a series of deep lakes filled with open blue water. Not frozen, blue, warm. The water temperature in those lakes was warmer than surface water off the coast of Florida, in Antarctica, a continent where the average annual temperature in many regions does not rise above -50 degrees Fahrenheit. No conventional geological model has ever fully explained the heat source maintaining those temperatures. Geothermal activity has been proposed. No confirmed source has been identified beneath the oasis floor. The oasis exists, the water is warm, the reason remains to this day open. But the Bunger Oasis was not the account that ended the mission. And it was not the account that nobody wanted to put on the record. Pause for just a second. I want to know what you think is already happening here. Drop it in the comments. Geothermal anomaly, something stranger, or something we do not have a name for yet. Let's see what the records actually say. It is late February. The Antarctic summer is at its thickest. A few more weeks before true polar conditions set in. Exactly the window the mission planners had built into their operational calendar. Task Force 68 should not be going anywhere. The orders come down anyway. Ships are recalled from station. Aircraft are secured to flight decks. Equipment is loaded back onto support vessels, including the heavy rollers and pavers brought specifically to build a functional ice airstrip, the kind of infrastructure you only construct when you plan to still be there in deep winter. They are packing it up, all of it, leaving it unfinished. The Navy's official statement, issued upon the task force's return, cites early onset of winter conditions and deteriorating weather as the reason for early termination. Read that again. A mission designed for polar winter conditions, equipped for polar winter operations, staffed with personnel trained for polar winter, ended because of approaching winter. The heavy equipment that killed Seaman Vance N. Woodall on the Ross Ice Shelf in January. The roller that crushed him during an unloading operation was brought to Antarctica for one purpose: to build a permanent ice runway. You do not ship that equipment to the bottom of the world for an 8-week operation. You ship it because you planned to spend a winter there. They left before the winter came. No supplementary operational report in the declassified files available through FOIA requests explains what specifically changed the mission calculus in late February of 1947. Not the National Archives filing under Operation Highjump designation. Not the personal papers of Rear Admiral Richard H. Cruzen, the actual operational commander of Task Force 68. Not the post-expedition debriefings, which exist in partial form and contain several passages that were redacted before release. The mission ended. The fleet came home. But before it did, before a single ship pointed its bow north, the Navy produced a public-facing account of the expedition. It was a documentary film, released in 1948, titled The Secret Land. It was narrated by Robert Montgomery, produced with full naval cooperation, and depicted the operation as a triumph of American polar exploration. Aerial photography, brave men in extreme conditions, science advancing at the edge of the world. It won an Academy Award. The things that happened between the arrival and the departure, the things that turned an 8-month mission into an 8-week one, do not appear in it. 4 men did not come home. Ensign Maxwell A. Lopez, Petty Officer First Class Wendell K. Henderson, and Petty Officer First Class Frederick W. Williams, killed when their Martin PBM-5 Mariner flying boat, callsign George 1, went down over Thurston Island on December 30th, 1946. The official cause was a blizzard. What George 1's crew transmitted in the final 47 minutes before contact was lost is not in any document available to the public. And then, March 5th, 1947, Admiral Richard Byrd sat down for an interview with journalist Lee von Atta of the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio aboard the USS Mount Olympus on the way home, and said the one thing nobody in the Navy wanted him to say. The El Mercurio interview is a matter of public record. The newspaper edition is archived. The date is verified. The quotes attributed to Byrd in that interview have never been disputed by any credible source. Byrd told von Atta, and I am working from the verified record of that interview, that it was imperative for the United States to initiate immediate defense measures against hostile regions. He warned that in the event of a new war, the continental United States could be attacked by aircraft flying over one or both poles. He described the threat as something for which the country was currently unprepared. He said this on record. On his way home from a mission, the Navy had officially declared a complete success. Now here is where you need to know something important, because this single interview is the origin point of the most widespread Operation Highjump conspiracy theory. And the origin point is a translation error. The interview was published in Spanish. When UFO researchers began circulating English translations in the 1970s, the key Spanish phrase, aviones que pueden volar sobre uno o los dos polos, was rendered as flying objects that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. The correct translation of aviones is aircraft, conventional aircraft. That mistranslation, one word changed, the rest extrapolated, is the single source of every Operation Highjump UFO account you have ever read online. In 2006, a Russian documentary titled The Antarctic Mystery of the Third Reich made a series of claims about Operation Highjump. It alleged that American pilots had reported being attacked by disc-shaped craft that emerged from beneath the water and fired on the fleet, forcing the early withdrawal. No official United States military record corroborates these claims. No declassified document supports them. No named American veteran from Task Force 68 ever went on record confirming any element of the Russian documentary's account. The documentary exists. The claims are part of the internet record. That is all that can be accurately said about them. There is also the so-called secret diary of Admiral Byrd, a document that circulated widely in conspiracy research communities, claiming that Byrd had flown into a hollow entrance at the South Pole, encountered green valleys and prehistoric animals, and been intercepted by saucer-shaped craft piloted by the inhabitants of a subterranean civilization called Agartha. Historians and archivists who have studied this document's provenance date its likely fabrication to the 1970s. It does not appear in any military archive. It is not consistent with Byrd's documented writing style or the timeline of his movements during the expedition. It is almost certainly a fabrication. Here is what that leaves you with once you strip all of it away: the mistranslated interview, the unverifiable documentary, the debunked diary. Remove all three entirely. Take them out of the equation. You are still left with something that none of those fabrications invented, and none of them explain. The most credible mainstream explanation for every unexplained element of Operation Highjump is this: it was a Cold War military exercise, not a scientific expedition, and the early withdrawal was driven by classified operational failures that the Navy was not prepared to disclose publicly. In 1946, the greatest strategic fear in Washington was a Soviet nuclear bomber attack coming over the Arctic, bypassing the radar systems positioned along conventional attack corridors. Highjump was a polar warfare rehearsal. Byrd's El Mercurio warning about a polar attack was almost certainly about Soviet aircraft, not anything extraterrestrial. This theory accounts for the scale. It accounts for the combat submarine. It accounts for the classified territorial objectives. What it does not fully account for is why, if the early withdrawal was due to conventional operational setbacks, no after-action report ever explained what those setbacks were. The documented Nazi Antarctic expedition of 1938 gave American intelligence a real basis for concern about an enemy presence at the bottom of the world. Task Force 68's combat configuration, carrier, submarine, nearly 5,000 men, is consistent with a mission that expected armed resistance. The theory holds that the fleet encountered a fortified position built by fleeing Nazi technical personnel in the final months of World War II. Equipped with technology, possibly derived from the experimental German aircraft programs of the war's final years, that the United States Navy was unprepared to engage. What this theory cannot confirm: no physical evidence of any such base has ever been found. No survivor or defector from any such facility has ever come forward. No document from the German wartime archives describes a plan to build one. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but it is worth noting. The Bunger Oasis presents a geological anomaly that no scientific model has fully explained. Warm open water at Antarctic temperatures, sustained without an identified heat source, in a continent where the bedrock beneath the ice has been compressed for millions of years. The theory, and it is speculation, not documented claim, is that the Antarctic continent conceals a subterranean thermal system of a scale and complexity that the 1947 expedition was not equipped to investigate, and that whatever it contains was considered significant enough to place the entire continent under international treaty restriction by 1959. What this theory cannot explain: why a geothermal discovery, however extraordinary, would require a global legal framework restricting independent exploration. In 1959, 12 years after Highjump came home, 12 nations signed the Antarctic Treaty in Washington. Every military operation on the continent was prohibited. All territorial claims were frozen. Independent access was placed under a governmental permission structure that makes free exploration effectively impossible for private citizens. 30 nations have since acceded to that treaty. It remains in force. Antarctica is the only continent on Earth operating under its own binding international legal framework. The Arctic, which is strategically more sensitive, more contested, more trafficked, has no equivalent restriction. The treaty has never been publicly justified on terms that explain why independent exploration specifically requires controlling. None of these four explanations fully accounts for what the available evidence describes: the scale of the deployment, the abrupt early withdrawal, the interview on the way home, the dead Secretary of Defense, the treaty 12 years later. Each theory explains part of it, none of them closes the file. Stay with me. Because the final account, the one that was never fully declassified, from the man who had the most to lose by talking, is unlike anything we have covered so far. If this story has you thinking, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps. James Forrestal, Secretary of the Navy when Operation Highjump was authorized. The man who signed off on the deployment of Task Force 68. The man who, in 1947, became the very first United States Secretary of Defense when the National Security Act brought the War and Navy departments under a single civilian command. Forrestal was not a man who frightened easily. He had overseen the naval dimensions of the entire Second World War. He had managed logistics and intelligence operations at a scale that very few people in American history have ever held in their hands at once. In the spring of 1949, Forrestal was admitted to the Bethesda Naval Hospital under psychiatric care. The official characterization of his condition described extreme mental distress, paranoia, sleeplessness, a fixation on threats he was convinced the public did not yet understand. On May 22, 1949, James Forrestal fell from a 16th floor window of the hospital. The official finding was suicide. The guard assigned to Forrestal's floor was absent from his post at the time of the fall. This detail appears in the contemporaneous accounts recorded during the review that followed. Forrestal's bathrobe sash was found knotted around his neck. These are documented details. They are in the available record. The circumstances of that death were never subjected to the level of independent formal investigation that the death of the first United States Secretary of Defense would, under ordinary conditions, have warranted. Forrestal's personal diaries, maintained throughout his tenure, covering the full period of the Highjump authorization and its aftermath, were removed from his possession by government officials before his family could access them. They were eventually released in a form that had been significantly redacted. The published edition, compiled by journalist Walter Millis in 1951, contains documented gaps in the entries from the months immediately following the Highjump withdrawal. What was removed from those entries has never been disclosed. In the available fragments of Forrestal's private correspondence from that period, letters to colleagues, personal notes, there is a recurring phrase that researchers have flagged but never been able to fully contextualize. In the available fragments of Forrestal's private correspondence from that period, letters to colleagues, internal memos, personal notes that survive the redaction process, there is a phrase that researchers who have worked the declassified archive have flagged repeatedly but never been able to fully contextualize. He writes, across multiple separate documents from the months after Highjump returned, that there are things the country is not prepared to know, that there are decisions which, once made, define the shape of everything that follows, that the men who carry that kind of knowledge do not carry it lightly, and most of them choose in the end to carry it alone. He does not say what things, he does not say where he learned them, he does not say whether he believes they can be kept from the public indefinitely. The sentence ends there, as if the men of Task Force 68 were not civilians who got scared by something in the dark. They were not people who had never seen the edge of what human beings can endure. They were combat veterans, men who had calibrated their perception of threat under conditions that most of us will never approach. They knew the difference between fear and data. They knew what it meant to observe something and report it accurately, because their lives, and other people's lives, had depended on that accuracy. There is an argument in military psychology about what extreme environments do to perception over time. Whether the polar conditions, perpetual flat light, featureless terrain, cold that enters cognition before it enters the body, erode the reliability of what trained observers report. Whether the mind, pushed far enough, begins to generate its own data. The argument runs both ways. The same environment that can break perception can also sharpen it past the point most people reach. The men who function in the polar dark, who complete technical work in it, who survive it, they know what they are seeing. They have been wrong before, in high-stakes situations, and they corrected. They do not report what they did not see. The declassified record gives us coordinates and names and official findings. It gives us the external shape of what Task Force 68 did between August of 1946 and February of 1947. It does not give us the interior of it. It does not tell us what 4,700 men carried home inside them, what they said quietly to people they trusted, what the ones who said nothing at all had decided, in that specific silence, to keep. Here is the question I am leaving with you. I mean it as a real question, not a setup. I do not have a clean answer to it. If the Navy found exactly what they said they found, ice, coastline, weather, nothing else, why has no government in 80 years ever simply opened the continent and said, "Go, look for yourself. Confirm that there is nothing there"? The men who came back from the ice kept what they knew the way you keep something that, once spoken aloud, cannot be taken back. And they understood, without being told, that some things are safer as silence than as the truth. Now I want to hear from you. Which theory do you believe? The Cold War rehearsal that went wrong in a way they could never admit? The Nazi base that outmatched the armada sent to destroy it? The treaty that 30 nations signed to keep something buried? Or something else? Something that does not fit any of those categories? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Let's talk about it. We set a goal of 50 likes on this video. If we crossed it, that is your support, keeping this channel going. If we have not crossed it yet, this is your moment. Next time, we go even deeper. A different war, a different continent, a mystery that took 60 years for any government to even acknowledge existed. And the men who knew the truth never got to tell it. Subscribe so you do not miss it. I will see you in the dark.